You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I want to start, believe it or not, with college basketball. Because not a lot happened in the 4 major sports yesterday. There are a few football stories that I want to talk about, but they're not as important as college basketball. The one thing I'll say about the 4 major sports is, yesterday was a very good day to be an Islanders and Nets fan. The Islanders blew out the Bruins, and the Nets blew out the Magic. Not too often you see that. I was a very happy camper. But, like I said, I gotta start with college basketball and me nailing Iowa, Michigan. I mean, granted, I did think the game would be closer than it was, but I did say Michigan would win, and I was right. I mean, Michigan did more than win. They destroyed Iowa. Ran them out of the building in the second half. What did I say yesterday? There was a way for Iowa to win this game. They just needed to be very perimeter-centric. Instead, Iowa just kept attacking inside. Luka Garza only attempted 2 threes. Only 2 Hawkeyes, Jordan Bohannon and Joe Wieskamp, attempted more than 2 threes. That is inexcusable. Against an old school center like Hunter Dickinson, that's not going to work. And Dickinson dominated this game. He was the best player on the floor. Contesting every shot, giving Garza fits. He had 14 points and 8 rebounds. Now granted, Franz Wagner had 21 points and Isaiah Livers had 16 points. But in terms of the overall game, I thought Dickinson was the best player on the floor. Another thing I said yesterday was that Luka Garza couldn't be the high man if the Hawkeyes were gonna win this game. I said he would be held under 20. I nailed that. I thought Joe Wieskamp had to be the high man. Wieskamp was really a tertiary thought in this game. It was more Garza and Bohannon. I wanted Wieskamp to get more involved. Granted, he wasn't great yesterday. 4 for 9 from the field, but just 1 for 5 from beyond the arc. He finished with 11 points. But I really wanted Iowa to flex their shooting muscles. This was a terrible game for Iowa, any way you slice it. I thought the coaching was terrible. I thought the game plan was terrible. I like Fran McCaffrey. I'm not knocking him. But in terms of what happened yesterday, Terrible job by him. Give the Wolverines a ton of credit for executing. Their big three went off. They're going to be an incredibly tough team to beat in March. Iowa can be a tough team to beat too, but they've got to be a little more matchup based. I understand sticking to what got you to that point, but if it's clear it's not going to work, come up with something else. It was very predictable that Garza would have a tough time dealing with Dickinson. Drag Dickinson out to the perimeter. Then you've got him. It's like the Utah Jazz. They have an old school center in Rudy Gobert. If he's brought out to the perimeter, he struggles. I really thought this was a terrible game for the Hawkeyes. I don't know how big this cross-section is, but if you're a Wolverines fan, an Islanders fan, and a Nets fan, you had to be smiling as your head hit the pillow last night. And speaking of the Islanders, I do want to say this. I did get tickets to the 3 Islanders-Devils games at the Prudential Center. The game on Tuesday, the first game that the Devils are playing in front of fans this year. I'll be going with my best friend Mark. And the 2 weekend games, I'll be going with my father. It's been a long time since I've been this excited about going to a sporting event. But let me just say that if you don't feel comfortable going, I don't begrudge you for that. If you want to be a little more cautious, I respect that. Moving on now to the biggest upset that happened yesterday, and that is MSU knocking off OSU. Which means that Sunday's game between Iowa and OSU is going to be really interesting. You've got another element added to it. Both these teams are going to be ticked off. OSU got upset by an inferior team, and Iowa got blown out with the entire college basketball world watching. Sunday's game is going to be absolutely fascinating, but I gotta focus on an MSU team that is making a very strong case to sneak into the tournament. They've won their last 3 games. They beat 2 top 5 teams this week. Coming up, they have Michigan twice. If they can beat Michigan just once, they're in. In terms of marquee wins, how can you do any better than beating Illinois, OSU, and Michigan? Even if they lose the 2 games to Michigan, you can make a strong argument that they should be in. I know Izzo was really happy going back into the locker room after the upset was complete. What he also had to be happy about was the well-rounded effort that his team had. Aaron Henry was the high man. He had 18 points. Really good player, but the Spartans got contributions up and down the lineup. Gabe Brown had 11 points. Joshua Langford had 8 points. Joey Hauser had 8 points. Marcus Bingham had 8 points. With about 2.5 minutes left, Malik Hall hit a couple free throws to give the Spartans the lead. Then at the end of the game, Langford just clamped down on Dwayne Washington. The Buckeyes have a chance to tie or win the game. Langford said no. Chris Holtmann thought there should have been a foul. I didn't think so. I like the idea of letting the players play in that situation unless it's egregious, and I didn't think it was egregious. I mean, this was a really impressive win for the Spartans. If they can get contributions up and down the lineup like this, they're a tough team to beat. I mean, Rocket Watts no-showed. 1 for 10 from the field, 1 for 4 from beyond the arc. He only had 5 points, and MSU still won this game. That's incredibly impressive. If I was an OSU fan, though, I wouldn't be banging tables over this loss. Should the Buckeyes have won? The answer is yes. But they did play their game. They played a close game. Everyone stepped up who you really wanted to step up. Washington had 17. E.J. Liddell did a great job of getting to the free throw line. He had 18 points, 10 for 12 from the charity stripe. Justice Suing had 10 points. The one thing I'll say is, Justin Ahrens and Musa Jallow played a combined 53 minutes for the Buckeyes yesterday. You know how many points they scored? 0. You know how many shots they attempted? 1. Ahrens. You want to talk about players being invisible? Did you ever see the movie Chicago? You know the song Mr. Cellophane? Ahrens and Jallow were living up to that last night. I give C.J. Walker credit for trying to step up off the bench. He had 12 points. But OSU does need to get better production from guys not named Liddell, Washington, and Suing. It's been an issue all year for him. The reality is, this was a typical OSU game. It's hard for me to bang my fist on the table over it. Moving on now to Colorado upsetting USC. Two teams that you really don't see a lot unless you live on the West Coast. But it was an interesting game yesterday between those two teams. Two teams that are going to be in the big dance. USC definitely will. Colorado definitely should be. You've got to give the Buffaloes a ton of credit for clamping down a really, really good Trojans offense. They have a bunch of really good scorers. Evan Mobley is going to be a high lottery pick in the coming draft. Taj Edey is averaging over 14 points a game. And Isaiah Mobley and Drew Peterson are averaging over 9 points a game. But this Colorado defense, a defense that only gives up 63.1 points per game, the 27th best mark in the nation, just clamped down. Mobley and Edey only had 13 points. Isaiah Mobley only had 2. Peterson only had 4. USC shot 38% from the field, 31% from beyond the arc, and 61% from the free throw line. Colorado did a great job of disrupting their offense. Mobley looked incredibly overmatched, which you really don't see because he has dominated the Pac-12 all year. They did a great job of getting into the passing lanes. Colorado had 7 steals. You know how many assists USC had? 7. I don't know if I've ever seen that before. A team have the same number of steals as their opponent does assists. And Colorado did a great job of capitalizing on those turnovers. They got 17 points off turnovers. That's the difference in the game, right there. Their offense came through in a big way. McKinley Wright had 15 points and 14 assists. Off the bench, Jariah Horn had 24 points and 11 rebounds. Deshaun Schwartz had 12 points. Eli Parquette had 10 points. This was an incredibly impressive win for Colorado. This is a win that they can point to and say, hey, committee, we did this. Put us in. There's no doubt in my mind that they should be in. But the committee can be weird sometimes with more obscure teams. And all due respect to Colorado, all due respect to the Pac-12, but because they're on so late, the committee may not have seen them a whole hell of a lot. Again, Colorado should be in, and I think they will be in, but it's not the slam dunk that it should be. Alright, now it's time to preview tomorrow's games between 2 ranked teams. And I'll start with the Battle of Texas. The Longhorns taking on the Red Raiders. I've spoken about both these teams before. I'm not going to go crazy in depth on them. They both have very talented rosters. Texas with Andrew Jones, Courtney Ramey, Matt Coleman, Greg Brown, Kai Jones, and Jericho Sims. And Texas Tech with Mac McClung, Terrence Shannon, Kevin McCullough, Kyler Edwards, Marcus Santos Silva, and a guy who flies under the radar, but he really shouldn't, in Amari Burnett. He fits Texas Tech's identity perfectly as a defense-first team. I mean, they can score, don't get me wrong. Mac McClung is a really good scorer. But we all know that Chris Beard likes to win games by defense. Shaka Smart used to at VCU. He just really hasn't done that at Texas. This is a very offense-forward team. And I think they're going to have a tough time with this stifling Red Raiders defense. The game is in Lubbock. I don't like this matchup for the Longhorns. I don't think their offense is going to break through Texas Tech's stifling defense. Give me the Red Raiders. Moving on now to a very similar matchup, and that is Illinois taking on Wisconsin. You've got the high-powered Illini offense led by Ayo Dosunmu and Kofi Coburn, one of the best dynamic duos in the nation. And they have a pretty good tertiary piece in Trent Frazier. He doesn't get as much attention as he should. Meanwhile, you take a look at the Badgers, they're very defense-heavy. Demetric Trice, Brad Davison, Nate Ruvers, Jonathan Davis, and Tyler Wall are all really good defenders. And every one of those guys, with the exception of Wall, can kill you offensively. You combine that with guys like Micah Potter and Aleem Ford. The Wisconsin offense is better than people give it credit for. Now, Illinois' defense is better than people give it credit for, too. It's not at the Wisconsin or Texas Tech level, but it's still pretty darn good. But again, I don't like this matchup for an offense-heavy team like Illinois. Wisconsin has a stifling defense. They can score. It's at Wisconsin. Give me the Badgers. Moving on now to the matchup that I'm looking forward to the most tomorrow. Baylor versus Kansas. You've got two teams going at it that I think are capable of winning it all in March. Baylor is arguably the most well-rounded team in the nation. They have the second best offense in the country, 86.4 points per game, and the 30th best defense in the country, 63.3 points allowed per game. You take a look at their roster: Jared Butler, Masio Teague, Davion Mitchell, Adam Flagler, Matthew Mayer, Jonathan Chama-Chachua, and Mark Vidal. How do you beat this team? I shouldn't leave out Flo Thamba. Thamba is a solid rebounder. Meanwhile, you look at Kansas, their starting five is as good as any starting five in the nation. Okai Agbaji, David McCormick, Jalen Wilson, Christian Braun, and Marcus Garrett. I've said it before that I think the Jayhawks are a team to be reckoned with. But I don't like this matchup for the Jayhawks. I think the Bears are deeper. I think the Jayhawks aren't as well balanced in terms of offense and defense as the Bears are. Bill Self is a great coach, but Scott Drew has done an excellent job with this Baylor program. All in all, I just think Baylor's the better team here. That's why I'm picking them. Alright, now I'll give you some NFL Valk talk. And I'll start with a couple Tennessee Titans stories. The first is that the Titans released Adam Humphries. And the second is that according to Ian Rappaport of NFL.com, the Titans are shopping Isaiah Wilson. Let me start with Humphries because he's the easier guy to tackle, no pun intended. I like Humphries a lot. I think he has talent. I think he's a very underrated slot receiver. The thing is, though, the Titans really don't use their slot receiver a lot. When you have A.J. Brown and Corey Davis on the outside, how much are you going to focus on a guy like Humphries or Khalif Raymond or Anthony Ferkser? Jonnu Smith gets his because he's a great red zone threat. But that's really it. You just have to focus on those three guys if you're Ryan Tannehill. That's what the offense calls for. That and a healthy dose of Derrick Henry. This move does make sense for the Titans. It does put them under the cap as of this very moment by just under $2 million. But I'll say this. With Corey Davis set to be a free agent, I'm not sure how I feel about cutting a talented receiver in Humphries. If Davis leaves, it would have been nice to have a guy like Humphries help pick up the slack. So I don't hate this move for the Titans. It does make sense in a bubble. I just hope they don't lose Corey Davis for their sake. I mean, granted, I'm not the biggest Davis fan in the world. I don't think he's bad, don't get me wrong, but I don't think he's great. I do think he's a little overrated. He is going to get a big contract because he's 26. And last year he had 65 catches for 984 yards and 5 touchdowns. But people talk about him like he's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. He's not even close to that. I wouldn't mind him on the Jets, don't get me wrong, but there are a few guys who I want ahead of him. Namely, Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, and Kenny Golladay. Okay. Now on to the big one. Isaiah Wilson. The big hulking right tackle that was born in Brooklyn, went to my father's high school in Poly Prep, got a bunch of offers from big schools, ended up going to Georgia. I really liked him in this past draft. I don't remember exactly where I had him on my big board, but I did like him. The Titans made him the 29th overall pick in the draft. However, last year for Wilson went about as badly as it possibly could. He was placed on the COVID list twice, only played 4 snaps the whole season, 3 on offense, 1 on special teams, in the Titans' Week 12 win over the Colts. After that, he was suspended for the next game against the Browns because of a violation of team rules. And he finished the season on the NFI list. John Robinson said some pretty interesting things about Wilson. He really put him on blast and said last week, and I quote, he's going to have to make a determination on if he wants to do everything necessary to play pro football. In response to that, Wilson tweeted something that he later deleted, but the internet saves everything. The tweet said that he's done with football. So now it's gotten to the point where after only playing 4 snaps in the NFL, the Titans are ready to cut bait on their first rounder in this past draft. I'm about to say something that I never thought I would say about a first rounder after his first year in the league. It's probably best for both parties, the Titans and Wilson, that he gets a fresh start somewhere else. It's obvious that the Titans are frustrated with Wilson. He's already behind the 8 ball there. He's going to have a tough time getting out from under there. Is it possible to? The answer is yes. It's just really, really hard. In fact, it's next to impossible. Once you're in the doghouse like this, it's very hard to get out of it. I mean, I don't begrudge the Titans for laying the hammer down on him, but it seems like this could have been handled differently by the Titans. Here's a guy with all the talent in the world. Before he even got into training camp, he went on the COVID list. You've got to think that ticked Wilson off. And yeah, it just spiraled from there. Again, I'm sure that Wilson did some stupid things. I'm not saying he didn't. But for a GM to publicly blast his first rounder in this past draft like this, I can't support that. Don't you want to give it more than 4 snaps to try to make this work? And it's not like your right tackle was bad last year. Dennis Kelly stepped in, played, I think, every snap, and had a 65.9 overall grade according to Pro Football Focus. That's pretty darn good. So give Wilson some time to get his act together. Wilson's not an angel in this, there's no question, but to blast him publicly, to be willing to give up on him so soon, no. I can't endorse that. I like John Robinson. I think he's done a great job with the Titans. But that's a bad job by him. I mean, I'll tell you, I'd have no problem with the Jets trading for him. The Jets' right tackle last year was George Fant. Now, I've said in the past that the Jets could cut Fant, but that's just because he's on a big contract. And it's possible that they could get an upgrade in free agency like Taylor Moton or Darrell Williams. I'd have no problem with Fant staying. He's not a bad player. He's very athletic, and last year, according to Pro Football Focus, he had a 61.6 overall grade. That's not awful. Not great, but not awful. If you're the Jets, it does make sense to trade for Wilson, give him some time to get his act together, and in the interim, start Fant at right tackle. Yeah, I'll take a chance on Wilson's talent. You don't give up on young offensive linemen with tons of talent. I mean, I remember when Laramie Tunsil fell in the draft because of that picture of him in a gas mask smoking weed. Laramie Tunsil has turned into one of the best left tackles in the NFL. Before the 2015 draft, Lal Collins was viewed as a first-round prospect. Then some stuff came out about a shooting involving a pregnant woman. Collins went undrafted. The Cowboys snatched him up. and he's turned into a really good NFL player. He missed last year with an injury, but still, really talented right tackle. The point is, you don't give up on incredibly talented offensive linemen. If I was Joe Douglas, I'd look to buy low on Wilson. It seems like the Titans would be willing to give him up for peanuts. I'm talking like a 7th round pick. That's a steal for the Jets. Even a 6th rounder's a steal. You know what? I could even be talked into a 5th. I would love Isaiah Wilson on the Jets. Every team in the NFL that could stand to upgrade at right tackle should be in on Wilson. Don't give up on him because he had a rocky rookie season. Speaking of offensive linemen, Corey Lindsley said on SiriusXM that all signs are pointing to him not returning to the Packers. I know that people have talked about Lindsley switching teams for a while, and the Packers are in cap hell. At this very moment, they're $11.5 million over the cap. But you've got to try to find a way to keep Lindsley around if you're Brian Gutekunst. This guy is one of the best centers in the NFL. Last year, according to Pro Football Focus, he had an 89.9 overall grade. Did he miss a few games? Yes, I get that. But you know what? Here's a newsflash for you. Football's a violent game. It's okay to miss a few games. If you miss a bunch of games, yeah, that's an issue. But a few, I can live with that. Especially if we're talking about someone like Corey Lindsley. I'll say this. There have been some Jets fans calling for them to get Lindsley. And I wouldn't hate it by any stretch. Again, Lindsley is a very talented player. But I feel like the Jets have bigger fish to fry. Signing Lindsley means that Connor McGovern would move over to right guard. They can't cut McGovern. As much as I'd like to cut McGovern, that was the one guy who Joe Douglas made a big commitment to in free agency last year. And of course it didn't work out. I'm not surprised. Greg Van Roten would be the guy to get cut. And Van Roten wasn't bad last year. 63 overall grade according to Pro Football Focus. I like him. I think he's a solid player. Not great, but not terrible. Could the Jets sign Lindsley? The answer is yes. And I wouldn't be totally opposed to it. But they have bigger fish to fry. Deal with your more pressing positions of need, then upgrade around the edges. Moving on now to the Texans cutting Duke Johnson. And I like this move. It makes sense. Johnson isn't one of my favorite players. He's a good pass-catching running back, but that's really all he's good for. But even then, last year, he didn't set the world on fire. He had 77 carries for 235 yards and a touchdown, and 28 catches for 249 yards and a touchdown. Johnson does have some talent. If you're a coach or an offensive coordinator that runs an offense that predominantly features a pass-catching running back, go after Duke Johnson, and you'll be fine. But if you like having a traditional running back, stay away from Johnson. He's only 5'9". He's not terrible. There's a role for him in the league. But I don't think he's great. I've never been a huge fan of his, like I said. And Dontrell Hilliard, who I spoke about, I think earlier this week, could be a decent backup. Having said that, though, I do expect the Texans to draft a running back. Cutting Johnson saved the Texans over $5 million. This is a good move for the Texans. It's really a no-brainer. On Monday, I'm going to release my schedule for March Madness, NFL free agency, the team-specific shows, the whole shebang. I went all out in preparing for the next 2 months. I'm not kidding. I want to tell you about things 2 months in advance. You'll get that at the end of the regular episode of the Jacob Valk Show on Monday, and at the end of the Brooklyn Nets Show on Monday. That will be posted in the evening. Until next time, I am Jacob Valk saying that the Washington Senators were never very good. But not much has changed in D.C. The Senators they have there now still aren't very good.